Ghostwire Tokyo's big selling point is its personality. This PlayStation 5 title by Tango Gameworks, a developer that is a subsidiary of Bethesda that previously did the two Evil Within games, is dripping with panache and style. The game's story is authentically told in Japanese, the world has an abundance of color and visual flair, the horror elements are inspired, and the combat's first-person magic system, think finger guns that are actually dangerous rather than just being that cringe thing that people did in the 70s or whatever, has a lot of variety and rock, paper, scissors elements, and when combined, the game is an overwhelmingly enjoyable and unique experience, at least so far, seeing as I'm still less than halfway through the game as of this recording, that is different from the typical AAA open-world video game experience. It stands out in a good way, just like reading a rational political opinion on Facebook, because that's rare. Ghostwire Tokyo's interesting qualities start with its bonkers story. The plot follows Akito, who was grievously injured after being hit by a car, but instead of seeing a game over screen, a spirit named KK inhabited his body and ultimately revived Akito to where he could get up and walk around even though he was previously splattered on the pavement. And with that, Akito remains in control and is now gifted with the aforementioned magic finger gun capabilities. This is important to note because Tokyo is under attack by mystical forces and spirits that have severed the population's souls from their bodies, save for Akito, who has SBF soul blocking protection, and from there Akito and KK must navigate open-world Tokyo and combat this evil. The narrative is pretty good so far. The empty streets of Tokyo and the paranormal activity roaming the streets are fairly creepy looking, and the character development between Akito and KK is fairly good. After all, the two don't really get along with each other, yet they are united in their efforts to defeat the evil that has taken a hold of Tokyo. But it is an uneasy alliance, which is interesting from a storytelling angle given that Akito and KK have different views on the best way to proceed on their mission. They both want to control Akito's body, KK because he is more experienced in combat and understands paranormal activity, and Akito because, well, it's his body. And due to this, there's a lot of hang-ups between these two characters that they must overcome, which ultimately makes for an engrossing and good story. The open world is interesting as well. The empty, rain-drenched streets of this otherwise colorful and heavily detailed Tokyo instill an eerie tone. With Tokyo's city lights and the vibrant skyline, we get a sense that Tokyo is supposed to be a very lively place, yet this world is bereft of people, adding a certain haunting texture to the proceedings, which gives Ghostwire Tokyo's world a lot of personality and character. It's really good here. The world's smaller scope is beneficial as well. In fact, Ghostwire Tokyo's open world is smaller compared to the typical open-world AAA title, but that is not a bad thing. If anything, Ghostwire Tokyo's more compact nature makes for a more focused experience. Sure, it doesn't have an abundance of activities, and it does contain the usual capture this point to unlock more areas of the map objectives that are just an overused trope at this point in open-world games, but the game is more focused on the main story, side missions, collectibles, cats that act as merchants, and the artistic design of its world, rather than making you undergo an endless amount of ho-hum activities like the Assassin's Creeds and the Far Cries of the world. Ghostwire Tokyo just has more meaningful stuff in it, rather than the overabundance of filler present in other games that would put a Thanksgiving dinner to shame. It has a distinct identity. The combat is pretty good as well. The aforementioned magic finger gun powers have a lot of variety so far and are equipped via a weapon wheel. Wind powers act as a more basic attack, fire is a heavy missile of a power, water is good for area of effect, there are stun abilities, you can magically block incoming attacks and receive minimal damage, and the bow acts as a go-to stealth weapon. There are just a lot of gameplay options here that are unlocked quickly and make you contemplate the best power to use during any given combat scenario. There is a lot of variety here. The combat itself is very much focused on timing. Most of your attacks can be charged up, and when hit, every enemy reveals a weak point over the area where their cold dead hearts should be. Damage that area enough and you can stun them and essentially capture their souls, decommissioning them for good, which is just fun. Additionally, the level up system is fairly rewarding. Doing quests, defeating enemies, and saving the souls of innocent bystanders grants you EXP, which allows you to upgrade your magic, improve physical capabilities, and deliver Akito some much needed stat boosts. If you've played a modern video game before, then you know what I'm talking about. But Ghostwire Tokyo's upgrade options are worth noting. See, so many AAA video games intentionally force their progression systems to be grindier and less satisfying in order to sell the player microtransactions that allow allow them to skip the grind that was intentionally created in order to manufacture a problem that can only be solved by forcing the player to pull out more money from their purse or wallet, kind of like the US government's approach to tax season. Because if they deducted taxes automatically like most other countries, would we even need the likes of TurboTax to sell us a solution? Fuck to the no. And that's the same shit with microtransactions that thankfully aren't present in Ghostwire Tokyo, ensuring that this title is a lot more fun and rewarding to play compared to other games that engage in predatory monetization schemes. It's actually well done here. However, the gameplay does have some imperfections. A lot of the enemies charge at the player, causing there to be numerous combat scenarios that require the player to move around a bit in order to get away from attackers, which is a problem, mostly because this game takes place in a city, meaning that certain combat arenas can be more than a bit cluttered and can feel restrictive in terms of movement, which is something that you probably don't want to feel when there are umbrella-wielding hell demons hauling ass towards your very position. And while yes, there is a block button, I usually like to keep my options open. Sometimes movement is just preferable to blocking depending on the given combat situation, but the terrain can unfortunately work against you here. Another issue is the stealth gameplay, which feels secondary. Even though Aikido can in theory sneak around and use a bow and arrow to dispatch foes, the application of stealth is difficult in actual practice. Many enemy types don't have heads, which means you can't land the headshots necessary to incapacitate these enemies because, and I cannot state this enough, they don't have fucking heads. It's not optimal for obvious reasons. But even if they did have skull bones, the enemies often are not placed in the gameplay space in a way that is conducive for good stealth action gameplay. While sure, you can take out a single enemy from behind or land a good shot with a bow and arrow, there are still generally other enemies in the area that notice that shit and figure out where you are coming from fairly fast, all to the point that stealth is arguably a third wheel in this game, save for the sections where Aikido is without his powers, and the game, as a result, has areas that are implicitly designed with stealth in mind. Then stealth feels viable. I just wish the rest of the game felt the same way. With that being said though, the game is very satisfying. The visuals and the sound design when collecting money, enemy souls, or spiritual ammo has a lot of satisfying auditory and visual feedback. The character development is enticing, the open world is very focused, the upgrade system is rewarding, there's a lot of good visuals, and the gameplay is fun even despite some of its shortcomings. Truly, Ghostwire Tokyo is a soulful journey worth undertaking. And with that, that was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating, share, subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment telling me what you think of Ghostwire Tokyo, or if you're thinking of giving it a try. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon page. $1 a month gets you onto my Discord server, and $5 a month allows you to start making review requests. The link to my Patreon is in the description. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my patrons, particularly my high tier ones in David, Samantha, Devlin, Mom, and Morgan. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.